This is not a story about a port. It is a story about power. The power to choose where your goods move, the power to protect your economy when work closes one route, and the power to connect millions of Africans who have lived far away from the roads, railway, and markets that shape modern life. Look at the map of East Africa. Ethiopia has more than 135 million people, but it has no coastline. South Sudan has valuable oil, but the main pipes carrying that oil to the sea pass through a country at war. And on Kenya's northern coast, far from the busy port of Mombasa, stands a new deep water port built beside a region that was ignored for many years. On their own, these may look like three separate stories, but they are not. They meet inside one of the biggest infrastructure plans Africa has ever attempted. The Lamu Port, South Sudan Ethiopian Transport Corridor, better known as Lapsset. The full dream includes a port, highways, a railway, an oil pipeline, airports, new cities, power lines, and business zones stretching from the Indian Ocean deep into the African interior. Supporters believe it could open a new gateway for East Africa. Critics fear it could become an expensive road to nowhere, damage oil communities, and repeat the same mistakes made by projects that looked impressive on paper but failed to change ordinary lives. So what is Lapsset really? Is it the beginning of a new African trade map? Or is this still a giant promise waiting for the rest of the project to arrive? Welcome to Afri Arise, where we look beyond the headlines and ask what Africa's biggest stories truly mean for Africans. To understand why Lapsset matters, start with Ethiopia. Ethiopia became landlocked in 1993 when Eritrea became independent. And since then, the country has depended heavily on its neighbors to reach global markets. Today, more than 95% of Ethiopia's import and export trade by volume moves through the corridor to Djibouti. That route has served both countries. Djibouti earns from its ports and logistics system, while Ethiopia receives a dependable doorway to the sea. But dependence on one main doorway creates risk. When one route carries almost everything, fuel, fertilizer, machinery, food, medicine, and manufactured goods, any political crisis, security problem, congestion, or breakdown can affect an entire nation. For a country as large as Ethiopia, sea access is not simply about pride. It affects the price of goods, the speed of trade, the ability of factories to compete, and the security of the economy. This is why Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has repeatedly described access to the sea as a vital national issue. He has also said Ethiopia wants to solve it through negotiation rather than war. The search for another route has already shaken the Horn of Africa. In January 2024, Ethiopia signed a memorandum with Somaliland that was expected to give it access to parts of the coast. Somalia rejected the arrangement because it considered Somaliland part of its territory. The dispute raised fear of a wider regional crisis, but later that year, Ethiopia and Somalia signed the Ankara Declaration under Turkish mediation. They agreed to respect Somalia's sovereignty and continue talks on commercial arrangements that could give Ethiopia reliable access to the sea. That tension teaches us something important. Ethiopia does not only need a port, it needs access that is affordable, secure, and politically sustainable. Lamu cannot magically give Ethiopia its own sovereign coastlines. Kenya will still control the port and its territory, but Lamu could offer Ethiopia something useful, another commercial route to the Indian Ocean through a recognized neighbor. That difference matters. The goal is not necessarily to replace Djibouti. The wiser goal is to avoid depending on only one path. Now move west to South Sudan. South Sudan became independent in 2011, but independence did not change its geography. It remained landlocked. The country holds major oil resources, and oil has provided most of its export earnings and government revenue. Yet, the pipelines carrying that oil to the international market travel north through Sudan to the Red Sea. This means South Sudan's most important source of income depends on infrastructure outside its borders. When war broke out in Sudan in 2023, that weakness became impossible to ignore. In February 2024, damage and operational problems shut down the pipeline carrying most of South Sudan's Dardan crude. Oil exports fell sharply, government income collapsed, and pressure grew across an economy already facing inflation, hunger, and unpaid salaries. Exports later resumed, but the war and further attacks around oil infrastructure show that the danger had not disappeared. A repaired pipeline is still a pipeline running through a war zone. For South Sudan, an alternative route is not just an engineering project, it is economic insurance. This is where the Lapsset vision became powerful. The original plan includes an oil pipeline from South Sudan through Kenya to Lamu, giving Juba another route to the sea. But we must be honest, that pipeline does not yet exist. It has been discussed for years. Routes have been studied, political agreements have been announced. Yet, financing, security, oil production levels, environmental concerns, and the enormous construction costs have continued to slow it down. South Sudan and Ethiopia have also discussed alternative oil and road connections through their shared border. Some people see these different corridors as rivals, but for landlocked countries, more than one route can be a strength. The real reason from Sudan's war is simple. One pipeline, one port, and one direction are not enough for a country whose survival depends on it. Now return to Kenya's coast. Lamu is known for something very different from oil pipelines and cargo ships. Lamu Old Town is one of the oldest and best preserved Swahili settlements in East Africa. Its narrow streets, coral stone buildings, carved doors, and long Islamic history have made it a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But across the water at Manda Bay, Kenya built something modern and massive. Lamu Port officially began operating in 2021. The first phase has 3 working berths. The larger master plan imagines 23 berths. The harbour has a deep draft of about 17.5 meters, allowing it to receive very large modern vessels. Phase 1 was designed for an annual capacity of about 1.2 million container units. This depth was one of Lamu's biggest advantages. As ships became larger, ports needed deeper water, larger berths, strong cranes, and enough space for cargo to move quickly. Lamu was planned with that future in mind. But a deep harbour alone does not create trade. When the port opened, activity was slow. In its early years, only a small number of vessels called there. In 2024, it handled about 74,000 metric tons of cargo, almost double the previous year, but still tiny beside Mombasa. For comparison, Mombasa handled more than 45 million metric tons in 2025. That comparison is important because it brings the story back to reality. Lamu is not replacing Mombasa. Not now. Mombasa remains Kenya's main port and one of East Africa's most important gateways. Lamu is a second door that Kenya hopes to grow over time, attract transshipment traffic, and serve regions that Mombasa does not reach efficiently. Vessel calls and cargo at Lamu have been rising. Large ships have also demonstrated that the harbour can handle the kind of vessels it was built for. Still, the future of the port will not be decided by how deep the water is. It will be decided by what exists beside the port. A port without dependable roads, railways, warehouses, industries, and cross-border agreements is like a beautiful front door with no house behind it. And that is why the rest of Lapsset matters even more than the harbour. Lapsset was built into Kenya's Vision 2030 development plan. Its ambition was enormous. From Lamu, highways will run inland through Garissa and Isolo. One branch would move north towards Ethiopia. Another will stretch northwest through Turkana towards South Sudan. A standard gauge railway would carry heavy cargo across the same region. A crude oil pipeline would connect inland oil fields and South Sudan to an export terminal on the coast. Isolo, Lamu and other locations will become transport, tourism and business hubs. Airports, power lines, fiber connections, resort cities and special economic zones will grow around the corridor. The total cost has often been placed at roughly $25 billion, although a project this large changes in price as designs, exchange rates and connection plans change. The most powerful part of the idea is not one road or one railway. It is the attempt to build an entire economic system. A highway can move trucks, but an economic corridor tries to create farms, factories, warehouses, energy projects, hotels, housing and new markets along its routes. This is also what makes Lapsset different from many colonial-era transport lines. The old railways were often designed to carry raw materials from Africa's interiors to ships controlled by foreign powers. The promise of Lapsset is that African countries can choose the routes, connect their own markets, and decide what kind of development goes around it. Kenya, Ethiopia, and South Sudan helped shape the corridor, and African institutions have supported part of the wider regional network. But African ownership should not be confused with African self-sufficiency. Foreign contractors, investors, and development banks still play major roles. Chinese companies have worked on important sections. International lenders are needed. Private investors are expected to finance many of the commercial parts. There is nothing automatically wrong with that. The real question is, who controls the terms? Who carries the risk? Who receives the contract? And who gains from the finished project? Mega projects often sound complete long before they are complete. So let us separate the finished work from the future plan. First, the port is real. 3 berths are operating at Lamu. Ships are calling. Cargo is moving. Equipment and port services are being expanded. Second, parts of the road network are real. The road connection between Lamu, B2 and Gassam has substantially developed, improving access to the coast. On other road projects across northern Kenya have also moved forward in sections. The wider network towards Garissa, Isolo, Mayel, Turkana and South Sudan border is built, upgraded or prepared through different programs. But the entire Lapsset highway is not one finished road that a truck can already follow smoothly from Lamu to Juba or Addis Ababa. There are still missing links, slow sections, funding gaps, security challenges and unfinished work. Third, the railway remains mostly a plan. Kenya Railways has included the Lamu, Isolo, Moyale and Nakodok routes in its strategy. Official documents speak about scoping, planning and beginning development, but no complete Lapsset railway currently runs inland from Lamu. There are no freight trains carrying Ethiopian cargo from Addis Ababa to Lamu. There are no oil trains linking South Sudan to the Kenyan coast. The railway is the path that could turn Lamu into a true inland trade gateway, but it is also one of the most expensive and difficult pieces. Fourth, the oil pipeline remains inbuilt. Its strategic value is clear. Its commercial case is harder. A pipeline needs stable oil production, long-term agreements, security across borders, and enough revenue to justify billions of dollars in construction. South Sudan's instability, changing oil output, and the growth of other route proposals have made investors cautious. This does not mean Lapsset has failed. It means Lapsset is incomplete, and that difference is important. Africa should celebrate progress, but it should not confuse a master plan with a finished corridor. It is easy to discuss Lapsset as though Ethiopia and South Sudan are the only countries that matter. But the corridor also cuts through a large part of Kenya that has historically received less infrastructure and investment than the central and southern regions. Counties such as Lamu, Garissa, Isolo, Marsabit, Sambiru, and Turkana sit across huge distances. Many communities have faced weak road links, limited electricity, few formal jobs, insecurity, and difficult access to markets and public services. For people living there, Lapsset is not merely a geographical line on a map. It could mean a shorter journey to a hospital. It could mean a livestock trader reaching a larger market before animals lose weight or die. It could mean cheaper building materials, better mobile connections, electricity for small businesses, storage for farm products, and jobs for young people. A road can change the price of food. A power line can determine whether a workshop opens. A reliable internet connection can allow a small company in Isolo or Turkana to serve customers far away. This is why the corridor could be transformative even before every international section is furnished. But there's another side. If local people only wash trucks pass through the land, while outsiders take the jobs, contracts, and property, then the corridor would not feel like development. It will feel like extraction. A project should not be judged only by the amount of cargo that reaches the sea. It should be judged by the number of lives improved along the road. Lapsset faces 4 major tests. The first test is money. Building a port is expensive. Building thousands of kilometers of roads, railway lines, pipelines, power systems, and cities is far more expensive. Kenya has many competing demands on public money. Ethiopia and South Sudan also faces serious economic challenges. The corridor therefore needs a private investment and international finance. But investors normally want proof that enough cargo will use the routes. This creates a difficult circle. The railway needs cargo to justify its costs, but some cargo may not come until the railway exists. The second test is security. Part of the corridor pass through areas affected by militant attacks, banditry, cattle raids, and cross-border conflicts. A truck route, railway, or pipeline cannot succeed if companies believe workers and cargo are unsafe. The third test is politics. Government change, agreement change, relations between neighbors can improve or change. Ethiopia may gain new access through Somalia, Somaliland, Djibouti, Eritrea, or Sudan in the future. South Sudan may choose a different pipeline route. Kenya must therefore make Lamu useful even when regional politics shifts. The fourth test is environment and rights of local communities. Lamu is not empty land. It is home to fishermen, farmers, pastoralists, traders, and old Swahili communities. The surrounding coast include mangroves, marine habitats, and cultural sites. UNESCO has repeatedly raised concerns about the pressure that large-scale development could place on Lamu Old Town and the wider archipelago. Local groups have also raised questions about fishing grounds, land compensation, public participation, and the protection of environmental activists. Development is necessary, but development that destroys the life it claims to improve is not progress. Kenya must prove that a modern path and an ancient culture can survive beside each other. The most important thing Lapsset could change is not Africa's national borders. It could change the direction in which trade moves. For more than a century, East Africa's main transport systems have followed a few crowded routes. Mombasa connects Kenya and much of the Great Lakes region. Djibouti carries almost all of Ethiopia's maritime trade. Port Sudan has carried South Sudan's oil. When one corridor fails, millions of people feel it. A stronger region needs choices. It needs Mombasa and Lamu. It needs Djibouti and other lawful routes for Ethiopia. It needs more than one way for South Sudan to reach a safe port. It needs roads and railways that connect African markets to one another, not only mines and oil fields to foreign ships. idea is becoming more important because under the African Continental Free Trade Area, free trade agreements mean little when goods cannot move cheaply between countries. A manufacturer in Ethiopia should be able to sell to Kenya without transport costs destroying the profit. A livestock producer in northern Kenya should be able to reach buyers in Ethiopia, South Sudan, or the Gulf. A South Sudanese business should not have to wait for a distant war to end before essential goods can arrive. Infrastructure turns political promises into real trade, and resilience comes from networks, not dependence. This is why the development of other corridors through Ethiopia and Djibouti does not automatically make Lapsset useless. East Africa's problem have never been too many reliable routes. It has been too few. So will Lapsset redraw East Africa? The honest answer is this: it already has on paper, a government policy, and in the way leaders think about the region. Lamu Port has moved from an idea to a working harbour. Some roads have opened places that were once difficult to reach. The project has forced Ethiopia, South Sudan, and Kenya to think beyond old routes and old limits. But the full corridor has not arrived. The railway is still waiting. The oil pipeline is still waiting. Many road links are still incomplete. The jobs, factories, and new cities promised along the route are still uneven. Lapsset stands between achievement and ambition. It is too real to dismiss as a fantasy, but it is also too incomplete to celebrate as a finished success. Its future will depend on patience, honest financing, peace between neighbors, protection for local communities, and leaders who understand that infrastructure is not built for maps, it is built for people. If Lapsset succeeds, it will not be because a giant ship entered a deep harbor. It will succeed because a farmer found a market, because a young person found meaningful work, because a landlocked country gained another safe choice, and because African trade became less dependent on one fragile route. That is the real promise of this corridor. Not simply to carry Africa's resources out, but to connect Africa's people's wealth. This is Afri Arise. If you believe Africa needs more African designed trade routes, tell us what you think in the comments. Should Kenya continue investing heavily in Lapsset? And can this project truly become the new gateway to East Africa? Subscribe to Afri Arise for more stories about the projects, people, and ideas shaping Africa's future. My name is Blessing Chris. See you in the next one.